Because let's be candid as Kenyans. I mean, tuodoe PR. We talked about the regime of President Kibaki. We talked about the regime of Uhuru Kenyatta. We are now talking about this regime. So I want to request my brother to tell me, who was chairman of budget during President Kibaki's time? And why do they not get compliments for the work he did? Let us assign responsibility where it is due. And let us be honest. The committees in parliament, and especially when the committees on the government side, departmental committees, budget committee, what you do is to propagate the agenda of the collective responsibility. But we have to know where the buck stops. And that is why when we analyze South Korea, we analyze the then President General Park. So I think that suffices for now. But let me just add, at the time when I served as the chairman of budget, because my issue about borrowing is more about the illegal debts. None. There was no single illegal loan, secret loan taken in Kenya. And I actually attended one meeting with the people in the National Treasury. I don't know whether Rafael was there. And we actually declined and refused the issue of securitization. Even the current PS of the National Treasury was not for securitization, was not for those illegal loans. And therefore, again, you cannot wrap the records through a rubber. You can go to the website. There was no securitization when I was budget chair. There was no illegal boats. Every borrowing was in the main book of government. I was chairman of budget, and it's important that I say that in parliament, there are 3 committees that deal directly with the economy. And forgive me, I'll be talking very fast because I have very little time. So, budget committee only deals with expenditure, where the money is going. There is actually a committee in parliament called debt and privatization. And therefore, the issues I talk about debt is not based on where I was. It is based on the issue is very important for the country. There is a substantive committee with a chairman in parliament dealing with debt. The revenue side also, there is a committee called finance. Finance deals with taxes and where the money is coming from. I thought it's good I make that distinction because I can see that you need that clarification. Now, going direct to the numbers, I have listened to my brother from the National Treasury. And in this kind of a conference, we don't come here to see who wins the debate. From my perspective, we come here to see how we can lay a good basis for our economy. Any part we can play, whether positive criticism or actually doing it, is welcome. And therefore my presentation will be based on how can we make our country better. And therefore the figures I'll be laying forward are not based on countering what the DG of in the National Treasury talked about. It will just be because if we just let one voice proceed, we may end up believing it to be true. So it is important we give all the divergent views with the hope of finding a good basis for the welfare of our country. And I will start here because I listened to him, so that even as I give my figures, we have the right perspective. He talked about debt in our country. And I'll just highlight one so that we are able also to, when we hear anything coming especially from even government, we have expertise here to actually verify. The economy of Kenya is projected to be around $131 billion by end of this year. That means it's allowed 60.9 trillion, thereabout. The debt in Kenya is 12.5 trillion now. So when we talk about debt to GDP ratio, we must never massage the denominator. Because you can just take your calculator now, tell me 12.5 divided by 16.9, whether it is 64% as he presented. It is actually over 70% debt to GDP ratio. So it is important we, as Kenya, we be very factual with our data, so that when we report figures that has GDP in it, we don't massage GDP, either inflate it or whatever to give us the right parameters that we need. Let me go back to my presentation. In 2003, when President Kibaki took over, the debt in Kenya was 600 billion Kenya shillings. 600 billion Kenya shillings when President Kibaki took over. By the time he left, it was around 1.8 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore, President Kibaki borrowed roughly, because there are some decimal points, around 1.2 trillion Kenya shillings for the entire 10 years he was president. And therefore, he was borrowing around 120 billion it's actually 100 billion every year. When President Uhuru Kenyatta took over, the debt was 1.8 trillion. In 2022, the public debt in Kenya was 8.7 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore, he borrowed around, we can say 7 trillion. So in every year, he was borrowing roughly 700 billion shillings. There is a reason I'm giving these figures. The current administration, when it took over, the debt was 8.7 trillion Kenya shillings. Now, as we talk with you today, the legal debts, because there are others which I'll talk about, the legal debt is 12.5 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore, in that span of less than 3 years, Kenya has borrowed 3.8 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore, Kenya is borrowing 1.25 trillion Kenya shillings every year. And therefore, the money Kibaki borrowed in 10 years, we are borrowing every year. And therefore, every day, we are borrowing 3.5 billion shillings every day. So this conference will be here for a week. So by the time you go back to Nairobi, you can do the calculations. That is the legal debt. Those who follow politics of Africa, you must have followed the politics of Senegal last year, where two gentlemen, that is Diomaye Faye and Osman Sonko, they are currently the president and the prime minister respectively, were actually had been locked in by government then. They campaigned for only 10 days and won, only 10 days, because people were fed up that time. Upon assuming office, please give me some water, Prof. I think this needs cooling off. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Upon assuming office in Senegal last year, they realized that the government of President Macky Sall in Senegal had borrowed between 7 to 13 billion US dollars of the book. What is of the book? There is a register the DG in the National Treasury is referring to. That is the one when you go to the Central Bank of Kenya and all the government data, you'll get to see how much is the debt in Kenya. That was the same book they thought was legitimate in Senegal then. Upon assuming office, they realized there were some debts baptized in other names. You can call it securitization, you can call it revenue-backed board, you can call it asset-backed board. In Kenya, they have names. One is called securitization of road maintenance levy fund. The other one is called Talanta board. The other one is many others. So they realized there was 13 billion US dollars borrowed off the book. As we talk today, the duo that was very popular in Senegal last year, just wait in the next few months. Actually, issues have already started. Why? Because it is important for a country to maintain one book of debt. And I've been talking about this issue because of the enormity of its importance. Kenya must stop borrowing off the book. Beyond the reported debt of 12.5 trillion, Kenya has already borrowed an illegal debt of 175 billion shillings, where they have gone to the banks, taken a loan of 175 billion, and then they are telling the banks they'll be collecting the fuel levy for the next 7 years. And I'm here wondering, the people in the National Treasury and in government, if you came in to lead and you realize that all the revenue had been securitized, then you'd be elected to do what? So that's one. Second is called Talanta Board. The Talanta Stadium you see, the cost is 45 billion in present value. But it is important for Kenyans to know that Kenya actually took a loan of the book of 45 billion shillings. And do you know what? Now, we'll be servicing that debt using sports fund. Every month, 500 million shillings. In 15 years, a debt of 45 billion shillings, Kenya will pay an interest rate of 100 billion Kenya shillings. And therefore, the cost of the Talanta Stadium in Nairobi, the one you see on Gong Road, is not 45 billion. It is the most expensive stadium in the world. It will be 145 billion in the next 15 years. So I've been requesting the people who are dealing with our debt, no one anakuzuia kukopa, but please let us maintain, as we have done in the past, only one book of debt. And this issue, again, was just discovered in Kenya last year. Actually this year, 2025, since independence, we have never done securitization. We have never done those kind of boards. It is important that when we get a squeeze on the normal borrowing, let us not expose Kenya by opening other secret, illegal books of loans. Policy, the issue of policy. I'm just going top line. As you realize nowadays, the fiscal policy in Kenya has now been hijacked by debt. And this is how. The reasoning of the National Treasury, they are my friends, I mean, some are doing their best. The fiscal policy in Kenya currently is only addressing one issue, to the detriment of the others. Why? If you look at both fiscal actuary and monetary policy, if you look at the issue of interest rate, we keep seeing the CBR is coming down. But if you look at the rating to the private sector, it's decimated. It is either stagnant or going down. So to whose interest is the interest rate in Kenya going down? It is basically because of domestic debt service. And that is why you see now the composition of debt in Kenya, and everything has ramifications. Previously we are 50-50, that is domestic and foreign. But over time, we are now past 60 domestic. Why? Because Kenya does not want to be accountable to the external lenders. And you can see the trend. If IMF asks questions, what is our response as Kenya? We come to crowd out businesses in terms of credit in our banks. So we borrow internally. So in Kenya, the banking sector is making every year a return in terms of growth in profit, but it's not in tandem with the productive sectors of the economy. Because the government is dominant in lending, in borrowing. In the economic classes, we used to be told the work of government is to release money to the economy, either through banks, through fiscal policy. Now we have inverted. Now the work of the government currently is to mop up money from the pockets of the people and from the pockets of the banks to do the public projects. But you are only transferring farm and consumer, farm and individual consumption to public consumption. Sorry, I just said I'll be doing the highlights. If you look at the exchange rate in Kenya, the exchange rate in Kenya is currently misaligned by around 12 to 18%. Misaligned in the favor of the Kenya shillings. Why? Because of the service of external debt. But what is the ramification of that? What is the ramification of having a misaligned currency, a stronger one? If you look at the graph of the Kenya currency, when Kenya was having its best years during President Kibaki's time, the Kenya shillings was actually misaligned to weaken, not to strengthen. Because when you strengthen the local currency, what are you basically doing? You make payment of interest rate cheaper, but you make all our exports less competitive, and number two, you make all the imports very attractive. That is why you see when the Kenya shillings is misaligned just because of debt, then we take a toll on the other sides of the economy, and especially the balance of payment, and in regards to the production side, not just the capital inflow and outflow. Let me, as I come to the conclusion, just say that what I have realized is that whatever PR you play around numbers, numbers will always betray you. If I say 4 plus 4 is 8, and somebody else is saying, no, it can be 9. Whether you paint it in black, in yellow, in red, 4 plus 4 will always be 8. And this is the reason I'm saying that. Beyond the paintings we are doing around how we are managing debt, how we want to do this, and how we've been doing this, numbers and figures always summarize stories. Numbers and figures always summarize narratives. Now, let me go back to the same regimes I talked about so that you compare by yourself. And you tell whether the policies now, the fiscal policy, because everything is boiling down to debt, is working or not. And I'll use the figure that encompasses everything, which is the GDP growth. GDP growth takes care of exchange rate, balance of payment, everything else. President Mwai Kibaki took over the economy of Kenya when the GDP in Kenya was 19 billion US dollars. By the time he left, I'll actually give 3 years just to accommodate everyone, because currently we are in our 3rd year. 19 billion US dollar was the economy of Kenya when President Kibaki took over in 2002, 2003. In his first 3 years, up to 2005, the GDP of Kenya was 26 billion US dollars. And therefore the growth in 3 years was 36%, just taking this and use at the base. It was 36%. When President Uhuru took over in 2013, the GDP of Kenya was 61 billion US dollars. In his first 3 years, the GDP of Kenya was 74 billion US dollars. And therefore the economy of Kenya by then grew by 21% in 3 years. Now, the current administration took over when the GDP of Kenya in almost 2023, 2022 was 114 billion US dollars. We are projecting the economy of Kenya to be 131. We are not already there because it's by the end of the year. But the projection by the end of the year, it will be 131 billion US dollars. So if you do the math in dollar terms, that is 14.9%. Now, all of us, most of us here, did NEC exams, which was out of 100. And for you to do CPA, I think most of you got A's in many things. So for us to come closer home and NEC, let's multiply by 2 so that we see. Because our mentality is NEC, even me. I mean, everything I mark is about NEC. So if you times by 2, that exists by 2, that comes to around 72%. In NEC, what is great is that? What is 72% in NEC? Nisaidieni tafadhali, nyinyi watu wa CPA. What is 72% in NEC? Anyone who did a NEC exam lately? Especially this is a KCP, KCSE. I think over time it was an A or something. Now, 21 times 2 is 42%. What is 42% in terms of NEC? That is, after Kibaki, that's the one that was following. Currently, after 3 years, it is 14.9%. What is 14.9% times 2? It is what? No, first say the number before you say the grade. 14.9% times 2 is what? 29.8, is it? What grade is it in NEC? What grade? Are those my figures? You can go to KNBS, CPK. I have used government data. Let me also come back home as I finish. Regionally. And these things I'm saying them because we need to be frank about our country so that we know where do we get from where we are. In the year 2024, Kenya grew by 4.7%. I've tried to take many sources and average them. World Bank, UNDP, Kenyan figures, and average them. So the Kenyan GDP grew by 4.7% last year. How did our neighbors fare? Uganda grew by 6%. Tanzania, I have actually taken all the sources and averaged. Tanzania grew by around 6.1%. Rwanda grew by over 8%. So I am talking about this so that Ethiopia grew by around 7%. So we need to know, when we reflect about what we are doing in Kenya, beyond the story we are giving, we need to look at the underlying. The other day I heard Kenya was to be closed for celebrations because I heard there was a big announcement that the GDP of Kenya has been projected by IMF to be the number 6 biggest economy in Africa. And I actually thought we are going to have a national holiday to celebrate. But these are the facts. In the year 2021, listen to me carefully. In the year 2021, the GDP of Kenya was 109.88 billion US dollars. I'll give in dollar terms because even that celebration was in dollar terms. Kenya, listen carefully. In 2021, Kenya was the number 6th largest economy in Africa. In 2022, the GDP of Kenya was 114 billion US dollars. In 2022, during election year, Kenya was the number 6th largest economy in Africa. In 2023, we already had a new government by then. Out of the mismanagement of the currency, in dollar terms, the economy of Kenya went to 109 billion US dollars in 2023. That is the point where Kenya became number 7 after being overtaken by Ethiopia. In 2024, the economy of Kenya persisted to be number 7 in the world at around 120 billion US dollars. So this year, we are now coming to number 6 again. You know, a guy who can come, demolish your permanent house in a village, demolish deliberately. After demolishing because he has money, then calls a village to join for Harambee, and he volunteers to build your house. But instead of building the Mawe house you had, the permanent one, he builds you a Mabati house, and he wants the whole village to hail them as a very benevolent leader. Because Kenya was number 6 largest economy in 2021, in 2022, so returning it to where it was, is that a cause of celebration?
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I get a minute? Omolo?
Yes, yes. Yes.
And that is the reason why Omolo, most of the projects in Kenya, I mean, just try to have your mind go across the country. Look at any project you can identify. I've talked about debt in Kenya. We are borrowing 3.5 billion every day. I've talked about the illegal debts in securitization, Talanta Board, and the rest. They actually are in the plan of securitizing your housing levy for the next 10 years. So they want to take a loan, and the security will be your housing levy. So the government that will come will realize the housing levy was already collected for the next 10 years. But that's not the point I had. The point is this. Of all the projects you know happening in Kenya now, starting with one that we are celebrating, Rironi Mau Summit, it's not part of the debt. It's also not part of the illegal debt. It is another issue. It is your pension money through NSSF that is building that road. So it is not the borrowed money I talked about. It is also not the illegal boats. It is also not the securitization. It's also not your taxes. Talk about a project like Nyota. You must have heard every government official talked about Nyota. It's also not Kenyan money. It's World Bank money. The expansion of Pangani, Muthaiga, Kiabu, Duberi Road is also not your taxes. That is Chinese money. The smart city project happening in Nairobi is also not part of your taxes. That is South Korean money. Any project you may talk about, even Talanta Stadium, is also not part of the debt I talked about, is also not part of your taxes. That is an illegal debt. So the question I have, and the DG I'm sure is listening, where are you taking the money you are borrowing? And where is then the taxes going? Because you'll tell us about budget support. Which budget support? Lecturers are striking for 42 days because of 7 billion. JSS interns, we are still debating about their confirmation. Capitation, the government now wants to reduce school fees for the scholars, capitation for the scholars, and the parents in Kenya will be paying over 20,000 shillings for day school from January, according to the circular that was sent by government this term. Because let's be candid as Kenyans. I mean, tuodoe PR. We talked about the regime of President Kibaki. We talked about the regime of Uhuru Kenyatta. We are now talking about this regime. So I want to request my brother to tell me, who was chairman of budget during President Kibaki's time? And why do they not get compliments for the work he did? Let us assign responsibility where it is due. And let us be honest. The committees in parliament, and especially when the committees on the government side, departmental committees, budget committee, what you do is to propagate the agenda of the collective responsibility. But we have to know where the buck stops. And that is why when we analyze South Korea, we analyze the then President General Park. So I think that suffices for now. But let me just add, at the time when I served as the chairman of budget, because my issue about borrowing is more about the illegal debts. None. There was no single illegal loan, secret loan taken in Kenya. And I actually attended one meeting with the people in the National Treasury. I don't know whether Rafael was there. And we actually declined and refused the issue of securitization. Even the current PS of the National Treasury was not for securitization, was not for those illegal loans. And therefore, again, you cannot wrap the records through a rubber. You can go to the website. There was no securitization when I was budget chair. There was no illegal boats. Every borrowing was in the main book of government. Samuel, about Kiharu and achievements. What we do major in Kiharu is that community projects are done in what we call labor-based. And therefore we end up having no one taking profits. So the entire utility of the money goes to the project. And that is why we achieve so much with so little. CPA Vincent, thank you very much for the compliments on borrowing, whether it is safe in terms of T-bills and boards. I just request, because there is no time, go and read about Ghana and haircuts. When Ghana reached where Kenya is going, the people who had lent to government were called in a round session. They were told, guys, we are in this situation. We know we owe you. We know I owe you 1 million shillings, but from today I owe you 700,000. It is a sovereign saying, so you do what you need to do. Read about Ghana, including pensions were cut. So when we reach a point where the government cannot service, the end result is to call leaders in a round table and basically say we cannot. So whether to buy T-bills or boats, I think you can make that decision depending on your investment horizon. In terms of labor, there is some, we are not saying their names. In terms of labor, what it means to the deficit in Kenya, the labor unrest we are having in Kenya, the root cause is inflationary pressures. Inflationary pressures, yes, we say the inflation has come down. I wish we had more time to talk about these things. But there is also the issue of purchasing power. So what you have done in Kenya, you are earning the same money you were earning last year in terms of the gross. Is the net, sorry, the last 5 years. You are earning the same money, actually being added. But is the bottom line the same? A person who was earning a gross of 100,000 5 years ago, and you're earning the same 100,000, is your net pay the same? There are much more deductions. So the purchasing power has been decimated. That is why we have unrest in terms of labor, because they are demanding for something equivalent from what they were getting before. And sorry again, I'm talking too fast because of time. Somebody else again asked about the 3 committees in Parliament. I think I have exemplified that. And I thought you guys would give me compliments, because, and which you have done, because if an astronaut tells you about space, they have been in space. If an astronaut talks to you about, if a sailor talks to you about the oceans, they have been in the oceans. So I am glad to serve Kenyans in this capacity also, because I've been there and I want a better Kenya, and the more the reason I am speaking loudly. And by the way, I'll continue speaking loudly about these issues.
Thank you, thank you.
I can see I have a minute. Governor Aguma, in terms of the comparison, Governor, I did 3 years because I thought it would be unfair for this current administration, because they have only served for 3 years. So I took from when each one of them started, what they did for 3 years up to the end. So I couldn't take 10 years. There's not 10 years yet. 5 years is not yet. So I took what is available. And out of that, President Kibaki grew the economy by 36% in the last, his first 3 years. President Uhuru by 21%. The current administration by 14.9%. Those are figures. They are facts. There is nothing much I can do about them. In terms of leadership, another brother, why do leaders... And I want to confront these issues as a yard. Why are you talking now? I am talking about it now because even then, when I was talking with the reports, even the reports of the budget committee then indicate we were totally against illegal debts. And none of the illegal debts were taken when I was chairman of budget. 0 securitization, 0 illegal bonds, 0 secret loans, because it was wrong, it is still wrong. Honorable Captain, it was the same about President Kibaki. Only one mistake you did. President Kibaki, President Uhuru did not leave the loan of Kenya at 10.7. 2022, you can Google. The debt was 8.7 trillion. And therefore, this current administration took it from 8.7 trillion to the current 12.5 trillion. Therefore, every year, we are borrowing 1.25 trillion shillings. As I come to the finish, CPA Mohammed, I think it was more or less the same. Capitation. There is a brother of mine who asked, what did you do that is, when you were budget chair, that's making capitation to be cut? Capitation was not cut when I was chairman of budget. It was being cut, it is being cut now. And I can assure you, me, sijipigi kifua, there are things I was putting forward when we were making the budget. The current JSS interns who are confirmed, 46,000 of them, very few people were for that confirmation. Because I was saying, they are the same people who are in the streets. I said precisely the point. They are in the streets because they don't have money. So I have been a champion of education, and that is why even now, I feel very bad that the government is adding school fees for day scholars. And as my closing remark, I can assure you, as MP for Kiharu, we are not going to allow the government to add the burdens to the parents of day scholars. They can get the money from any other place, from any other vote, but you are not going to allow the government to annihilate free basic education. If there is an assurance I can give you, it is that one. Whatever it takes, capitation can only go up, it cannot come down. And therefore we cannot shift the burden to the parents. Thank you very much, may God bless you.
Thank you, Honorable Ndindi.